Hey, welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis, and this week I am going to be bringing you a magnificent 7 of my go-to albums. This week's episode is based on a challenge I did on Instagram for my top 5 jazz albums. And I started to think it might be fun to apply that challenge to my entire record collection. Anyone who watches the show knows I love a good disclaimer. So bear in mind, I am not calling these my best albums. They are not my most impressive albums. They are the albums that I listen to over and over and over. No matter what new additions to my vinyl collection momentarily turn my head. So you're going to get my top 7 albums across every genre that I listen to the most. My wife could make this list for me, just living with me. So lie back and get comfortable. I don't know why I'm turning this into the Robin Bird show. 5 people got that. Because I am bringing you a magnificent 7 of my go-to albums. Before we get going, I just want to thank my latest patron. Thank you, Steven. I am overjoyed that you jumped on board. And welcome, Mr. French. If you guys are enjoying the content I bring you week to week, please consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/popculturegraveyard. And thank you. I'm just going to jump in. These will be in no particular order, but they kind of are. Velvet Underground and Nico. This is an album I listen to at least once a week. Sometimes I listen to it daily. I just leave it on and play it every day. I don't pretend to know why. The strangest thing about this being such a go-to album for me is if pressed, I will tell you my favorite Velvet Underground album is White Light, White Heat. And I still believe that. Yet for some reason, I play this all the time. This is a repress because I want you to see the banana intact. It came out on banana yellow vinyl, but it sounds really good. But as good as this repress is, you cannot beat an original. This was not an audiophile recording. It was primitively recorded compared to today. And the great thing about these old Verve records is that they can take a beating and keep on ticking. No, literally, you're going to hear clicks. But it should not overpower the music. And depending on how much you love this album, you can keep on upgrading and upgrading until you have a flawless copy. These routinely go for well over $100, sometimes $200 or $300. But there are still people out there who offer up beat-up copies, all scratched to hell. And the best part about it is they don't realize that they still sound pretty damn good. So I got a couple of these for around $60. And the one that I got is near mint. I got for $100. But a near mint copy, you know, goes for $300 to $400 to $500. Anyway, I listen to this all the time. I can't think of a more important album for modern American music than the Velvet Underground and Nico. Even the people who denigrate this as trashy, jerk-off art rock, I guarantee you those people listen to a genre that was birthed on this album. These stereo versions of this album are fantastic. But for years and years and years, people were talking about the mono copy. But mono copies routinely go for $500 and up. But I love to hunt for vinyl. And after a while, I found someone who was selling the record without the cover. And so I made my own. I went out and got a banana sticker to put on it. But this mono copy is in excellent condition. And it sounds fantastic. But I have to tell you, both the stereo and the mono both sound great. And they're each bringing a lot of things to the table. And on some songs, you'll prefer the stereo. And on some songs, you'll prefer the mono. I don't believe that one outshines the other on every single song. That simply isn't true. And if you want to hear what this album sounded like before it was re-recorded, you can seek out the acetate. This is the unripened version, which is long out of print. You may also know this as the Scepter Studio acetate, which had a different and I think ugly cover. This was recorded back in 1966, a year before the official album was released, and it even has the original running order. So there is no Sunday Morning on this album. That was done later in the studio with Tom Wilson, the real producer of the official album. Instead, this album kicks off with European Sun and is followed by the Black Angels' Death Song. That is an abrasively gloomy 1-2 punch that I don't think this album could have recovered from. I much prefer the official running order. And if you're looking for a copy, I recommend you don't mess around with any of the more recent reissues. I really recommend you hunt down the reissue from 1984, which was remastered by Greg Calby at Sterling Sound. This has the Black Verve label, and it really is one of the best sounding represses barring finding an original. Up next, Winter in America, Gil Scott-Heron. This has long been one of my all-time favorite albums. Side 2, track 1, features The Bottle, which is my pick for greatest power slot track ever. But this entire album smokes. Song for Bobby Smith, Your Daddy Loves You, Peace Go With You Brother. This album is an unrelenting masterpiece. One of the album's highlights is a live track, the H2O Gate Blues, which of course is all about Watergate, and hearing Gil's mastery over an audience is mesmerizing. Songs like A Very Precious Time, Rivers of My Fathers, Back Home. There is no let-up on this album. It does not even house the title track, Winter in America, which is my all-time favorite Gil Scott-Heron song. That track would show up on the first minute of A New Day. And if you've never heard Winter in America, holy hell. But the addition of that song would be the only thing that could improve this album. As with the Velvet Underground and Nico, I find myself listening to this album at least once a week and consistently looking to upgrade until I find a pristine copy. And I'm very happy to report that I have at least two. And I highly suggest, now that this godforsaken vinyl resurgence shows absolutely no sign of slowing down, that you get backups of all of your favorite go-to albums. Because before long, you're going to look to replace one of your favorites and find out that the price has jumped to 3 digits, and you're going to wind up with some crap copy because somebody else bought up a clean copy and hung it on their wall. The older I get, the better this album gets. It's aging with me, and that's why it's a go-to album. Next up, the Ramones' first album. There are more fun albums by the Ramones. I like Leave Home. I love Rocket to Russia. Road to Ruin has one of my all-time favorite Ramones songs. I Just Want to Have Something to Do. But holy hell, there is just something about this debut album that I return to time and time and time again. My favorites on this album include Beat on the Brat, Chainsaw, I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, I Don't Want to Walk Around With You, Loudmouth, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. Being a New Yorker and being from Queens, and falling in love with this album when I was like 12 and listening to it non-stop on cassette until that broke and I had to buy it on vinyl. It's so ingrained inside of me that these songs are like mother's milk to me. The older I get, the less loud, raucous music I listen to. I'd rather put on a Henry Mancini theme than some of the hardcore punk I used to listen to just 10 years ago. But this album will not be denied, and this was the copy that I would drag around DJing with me for years. It's a little bit beat up, but it plays like a champ. And if you're in the mood to hunt down some history, you can get an original copy. You can tell the original copies because they all have the code SASD 7520. The coolest part of this release, as you can see from the label, are the typos. The first track, Blitzkrieg Bop, is misspelled. Blitzkrieg has the E in front of the I instead of the I in front of the E. And the second track says Beat is on the Brat instead of Beat on the Brat. When you add that to the information on the dead wax, you can tell that you have an original. They actually had a reissue not too long ago with the same catalog numbers, and it did the same misspellings on the label, which I hate. I don't even think they put a barcode on the back. Any real collector hates that kind of shit. And you know why. 10 to 15 years from now, those scratched up records are going to be making the rounds. And people are not going to realize what they have, and shady people are going to try to sell them as the real McCoy. Anyway, long story short, go-to album. To see the rest of this week's episode, please join my Patreon at patreon.com/popculturegraveyard.